What's going on, y'all? I'm Czar, and I want to show you Unichannel from United Plugins. This is their new channel strip, and aside from being based off some very well-known classic gear, there's some interesting features that's going on under the hood that we'll discuss later. So Unichannel is a channel strip that has three different sections based off three different types of gear. You have British, US, and German. And if you look at these gear, not hard to tell what these are based off of. So we have British, US, and German for the preamp. That's the first section, and that's not going to change as far as the look when you switch between them, but the EQ and the compressor does. But back to the preamp here, you have input gain, mojo, and output. And then the middle, you have your EQ section. You have British, US, and German. Let's take a look at that US. So we all know what this is based off of, but what's interesting here to me is that it is 6 bands as well as a high pass and low pass filter. So a lot that you can do with this low shelf, high shelf, peak 1, 2, 3, and 4, giving you 6 bands total here. British, we all know what this is, and German, we've got the German EQ here based off tube EQ, and it's basically a high pass or a high shelf and low shelf, and then you have a presence here in the middle or at the bottom here. Moving over to the compressor, these are all tube compressors here. We've got the British, yeah, that looks familiar. US and German also looks familiar. So I've got a vocal and a guitar that we're going to listen to this on and hear what this sounds like. So let's take this back to the top. So we're going to have just guitar playing, and then the vocals is going to come in. So I'm going to switch through the preamps here. I'm going to mess with this mojo, output, and get some EQ going here. All right, before the vocal comes in, I'm going to take it back and go through the EQ here. I've made some EQ moves on each of these. We'll start with the British. And actually, let me bypass the compressor while I'm doing that. Okay. All right, and just on the guitar here, let's go through the compressors, starting with British. For this, we're just gonna, let's just go ahead and turn the EQ off for now. All right, let's get into the vocals here. So just really quickly, between these three, I'll just tell you what I'm hearing. Starting with the preamp, these all feel true to their sound, meaning that for British, I know that to be warm and have those thick low mids. The US seems to be more mid forward to me, and the German is just really big all around, but it's also a little brighter than the rest of them. EQ, feel the same. With the compressor, British one feels like more of an all-around compressor for me. US is a little grabby, a little aggressive, and German is just a slow, almost opto. This one is based off of Very Mu here, but it's got that slow opto feel here that you get with Very Mu tube compressors. And you see we've got the attack starts at 17 milliseconds, which is, I'd start to say, would get into a medium attack. It's definitely not a fast attack at 17 milliseconds there. All right, let's bring this vocal in and we'll do the same thing. We'll switch through the compressor, EQ, and preamp.
Here for dinner, like I'm a beginner. Loved you for your inner, and the next guy is out there somewhere, but you won't dare, 'cause you're too scared. Have you ever needed someone so bad, but he willing to make it last? Sometimes you gotta lose to win again. And if it makes you cry, 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 'cause all you do is fight, can't get no sleep at night, sometimes you gotta lose to win again.
So there's a look at what this channel strip sounds like on vocal and guitar. One thing that I noticed with the compressor, it's kind of odd to me, is that the gain reduction only goes down to -10, and that's on all three compressors. All the VU meters go down to -10. Just something that I felt was a little odd. I mean, you can easily do more than 10 dB of compression using a compressor. Let's talk about those features that I mentioned earlier that were going on under the hood. That's adding something different here with this channel strip. So you'll see in this upper left, it says VARM to technology. And so what this means is that each instance that you apply of this plugin is going to subtly change the sound a little bit so that they're not exactly the same. And let's test that out. So I've got two acoustic guitar tracks here, and let's flip the phase on that. And I have each one of these set to all US, so exact same settings on both of them. These are supposed to be slightly different because of the VARM2 technology, so we're going to test that out. I'm going to flip the phase on one, which means if this is slightly different, we should hear something. If it is the exact same, we should get phase cancellation and not hear anything. So let's see what we got. All right, so we are hearing a little something, which means that these are indeed different, slightly different, and that's for each instance that you apply. The other under the hood feature that this plugin has is that when it doesn't detect processing, it puts itself to sleep, drastically reducing the CPU usage. So let's test that out. Let's show my performance here, and all right, let's mute these. Okay, so I'm going to play the end of this, and we've got it on, and let's find it here. Should be this one. All right, so this number should go up once it starts playing to show how much CPU it's using, and then we'll see what happens after it stops playing and there's no sound going through the plugin.
If it makes you cry, 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 'cause all you do is fight, can't get no sleep at night, sometimes you gotta lose to win again.
I thought I muted that. Okay, so yeah, you see that it dropped its CPU usage to 0 once the tracks start playing, so that does work as advertised. So before I get into my final thoughts, I want to go over some attention to detail stuff here with the Unichannel. So the compressor, I just find this kind of odd here that I think it's worth pointing out, but let's start with the British compressor. The ratio goes from 1.5 to 1 up to 9 to 1. Just found that kind of odd. I've never seen a compressor stop at 9 to 1. Usually we'll go up to 10 to 1. And looking at the release, it's in milliseconds and it's got 10K here, which just kind of messes with my head a little bit with dealing with a channel strip with EQ as well. But 10K in milliseconds, 10,000 milliseconds is 10 seconds, which gives us a really long release time here. Looking at the US, that release goes up to 3 seconds, and the attack on the British here, 1 millisecond to 5 milliseconds. So you're pretty much forced into a fast attack when using the British one. The US one is going to have an auto attack here. With the German one, so I mentioned earlier we start at 17 milliseconds up to 61 milliseconds attack, which is really long for an attack there. And the release, I don't know where this ends. We've got 1.3 here, but not on the far end of the release to know how far that goes. And on the EQ side, this US EQ. So we all know what EQ this is based off of, and if you're familiar with this EQ, you know that this is not a variable EQ, and that was carried over here in this plugin. When you turn these, they are detinted, which is a really nice touch here, especially if you're used to using these EQs. So my final thoughts on the Unichannel. I'm not crazy about the compressors, but I do like the EQs. And what I do like about the EQs is that they all have specific uses. So the British you can kind of look at as your standard EQ. US, if you need to get surgical, you can do that here. You've got more than enough bands. And German, if you just need to do some broad tone shaping, you can do that here. I did feel like the gain staging was a little overkill at first, but the more I used this, the more I found myself using those different gain stages here. You've got input and output on the preamp, you've got input and output on the compressor, and then you've got an output fader. Never really had to touch the output fader, but the compressor and preamp, I did find myself using that to gain stage here. And I also like that you got the mojo to add some saturation, and you can drive the input into the saturation, which is really nice. Some things that I would like to see differently here, I would like the option to flip the EQ and compressor. The way that the signal flow is now, that is generally how I work. EQ and then compress. I know some people compress and then EQ. So I would like to see, an option to flip flop just the signal flow there. And I'd also like to be able to go all British, all US, or all German at the click of a button. You do have presets that allow you to select that, but I feel you should just be able to, I don't know, shift click or something on British, US, German, and just have it switch all the modules into that rather than you having to click around and select each one. So the introductory price on this is $39, which is a pretty fair price to get a channel strip. And the VARM 2 technology is cool, but the bigger feature here to me is the sleep function. So Studio One 5.4 recently added the feature to Studio One where it does put plugins to sleep when they're not in use. So if you need to save on CPU and you're not using Studio One or don't have the latest version of Studio One, this is a great plugin that's going to allow you to save on CPU as well as get a lot of different tones with a channel strip. All right, if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. If you want to continue to see content from me, then you know what to do. And I'll have a link in the description if you want to learn more about this. All right, any questions, comments, let me know, and I'll catch y'all next time.